Hey, welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us for the Weatherization and Youth Workforce Development, a whole community approach. My name is Steph Smith, and I'm with the partnership and here today serving as your host. This 45-minute session will end on time, so we encourage you to use the chat for questions throughout the session. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the session. This webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording and slides will be available as MLTC wraps up. Lastly, should you lose connection, simply log back into the session using the same vFairs link, and you'll be rejoined to the session. We will be placing a session evaluation into the chat. We ask you to complete that. That session chat is also located on your MLTC 2022 app. I'm going to turn it over now to Amy Jandusa English. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce our guests. My name is Amy Jandusa English. I am project director here at the Energy Partnerships Project at National Community Action Partnership. Joined today by Darnell Johnson. He is the CEO of Urban Efficiency Group. Paul Francisco, Associate Director for Building Science at the University of Illinois Applied Research Institute. And John Patty, Chief, he's with CETA, Community and Economic Development Association of Cook County, and I believe his title is Chief Expansion Officer, or CXO. All three of these gentlemen are what I have been calling titans in their field. They are going to talk today about the Green Generation Workforce Initiative, which is very exciting. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Darnell.
Thank you, Amy, and to everyone, all the attendants. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you're located at. First and foremost, we want to thank Amy and the NCAP and for the opportunity to be able to present to my, along with my other colleagues. We're really excited today to be able to share with you some of the exciting aspects and the news around the green generation. And so I want to level set at a very high level to kind of place things into perspective and give you an initial introduction of what green generation is and how it came to be. And my colleagues will be able to give more details regarding the program specifics. But green generation is a really exciting, initiative and project that we've been able to launch in a collaborative effort. Urban Efficiency Group, CETA, and the University of Illinois, along with Paul and John. We were able to come together and understand that there is such a great need for workforce development, and much of our focus usually is placed on fixing the workforce deficit that's confronting us right now. But we understand that it's so important to be able to be forward-looking and to understand exactly what's on the horizon around workforce development so that we can begin to address some of those future attrition gaps that we're going to inevitably reach, especially looking at the rate of individuals leaving the workforce, the workforce for energy efficiency overall, and not being able to see folks coming in at the same rate that they're leaving. And so the green generation is really a focus. It is a intergenerational advocacy, workforce, energy efficiency, leadership component that really takes our students and allows them to give them a wraparound experience. It focuses on leadership, it focuses on advocacy, and it focuses on technical skills around building performance and building science, home energy performance, and making sure that we're giving students early exposure and early engagement opportunities for these emerging markets. Our first cohort, and I'm sure John and Paul would dive into this a little bit more, but our first cohort was in Chicago, Illinois, and it was really exciting to see students from BIPOC communities getting engaged at a level and understanding how energy works and building performance and leadership and how to advocate for those things. It's really important that we not lose sight on the fact that if we're going to build the next generation, that there are a compilation of skills that they will need. In addition to having the industry specific skills, they will also need to understand how to lead and how to be leaders in these emerging spaces. And a part of that leadership is understanding sustainability more broadly, and how do we advocate to ensure that our communities are going to be future-proof and that they're going to be sustainable for generations to come. And so the Green Generation has taken on that challenge to be able to plant those seeds, cultivate those seeds, and ultimately grow the next generation of thought leaders, the next generation of home energy professionals, the next generation of sustainability advocates and practitioners. All of that is embodied in this one effort. And how we build that is very special. And that's what John and Paul will be speaking about a little bit further, in just a moment in the presentation. The last thing that I want to say is that, our communities are changing in a variety of different ways. We now know that diversity, equity, inclusion is at the center of much of our discussions, just in general, societally. How do we make things more diverse? How do we make things more inclusive? And, outside of the typical social identity groups of just race and ethnicity, we also have to begin to consider age, diversity, gender diversity, and all of these other aspects of diversity that oftentimes get lost because they don't fall into that high level of race and ethnicity. It's really important that we understand that our next generation of thought leaders are very in tune. They're very capable. They show so much dexterity in their understanding of complex issues and how they want to solve those issues, but they require the additional attention and the investment from those of us to be able to, for those of us to be able to cultivate those skills and those abilities within these students. And so I just wanted to provide that high level introduction to the Green Generation. It is an amazing opportunity to see students from all backgrounds, from all ages, early engage in things that are not necessarily on their scope. Saving our planet and lifting people out of poverty, advancing economic growth. These are all one and the same fight for us. And that's how we see this. We see it as a system versus looking at it as a silo. And that's what we've really put together in the Green Generation. What I will end on is the theory of change of what we really expect to see through the adoption and the broader adoption of programs like Green Generation. So if we look at the theory of change, and I'm just going to very high level this, our theory of change in the minimum viable product is to target communities of diverse representation in all communities, to make sure that those communities are, in the students that are in those communities and their parents and the stakeholders understand what's at stake as it relates to opportunities that are emerging within these spaces of energy efficiency, home energy performance, sustainability, leadership, coming up with strategies that will be able to address the workforce deficit, also taking into account the health and energy retrofits and health and safety, making sure that we're engaging municipal partners and opportunities for leveraging and collaboration, which is what John, Paul, and I have done. And then, making sure that those strategies are going to produce short-term and long-term outcomes that will ultimately transform the way that our communities are currently operating from both a sustainability standpoint, from a workforce standpoint, and from an economic standpoint. The three things that we really see in this space is economic opportunities, energy equity, as well as making sure that we are addressing all of our environmental issues overall. And so Green Generation is a compilation of all of that, being able to catch our students and engage them at times when they are most adaptive, will be most adaptive to the changes and the new opportunities that are being presented. All of that is encompassed in the Green Generation. And so without further ado, I would like to turn this over to my colleagues to be able to take us further, looking at all of the things, how we build our communities and our cities. We look at urban transformation. We want to address the equity gap, and then we want to level the playing field. And so all of those things, as we look at the Green Generation touches on urban transformation. It touches on the equity gap. We talk about the platitudes, the current practices of what we see within this space. When we look at sustainability, sustainability is often looked at in silos, and we really like to take a more holistic and systemic approach to that. And so we've come up with the system of sustainability, which all of these things are encompassed within this experience for green generation. So as you can see, it's quite diverse and quite inclusive as we begin to look at all of the pieces on the left that demonstrates what sustainability should really encompass. Place workforce opportunity under prosperity, health and well-being of our communities, making sure our communities remain connected, addressing the living infrastructure and the resource regeneration, and then making sure that there is a network of partners, which is demonstrated on the right side, a network of partners with diverse skills and diverse capabilities that will allow the sustainability efforts of our communities to ultimately grow and to be able to be transformative and not transactional. And then the last piece on the sustainability chart is the green generation, because it's so important that we are looking forward to empower the next generation of future leaders and making sure that that leadership cohort, that they're diverse in all ways that we can consider diversity. And so that's the high level of what green generation really is from a mechanic standpoint, from a construct standpoint, and from a conceptual standpoint. But to be able to give us more details on that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Francisco, who's going to then take us into our next phases and be able to place more flesh on the topic of green generation overall from a programmatic standpoint. Paul.
Okay, thank you very much, Darnell. So, on top of what Darnell was saying, and I think, Darnell's always does such a great job of giving that overview. We really look at urban sustainability as touching on all of these different aspects of justice. Certainly procedural justice is one of the things we really try to focus on, having people at the table when the decisions are being made, not just when it's time to start rolling out those decisions. But so I'll come back to that in a bit. So, I'm going to start talking about the program, kind of the nuts and bolts, what we're delivering to these students. And we really have an equity lens on this. Whatever we do, it needs to be with an equity lens. And equity is not a racial thing. It is not a gender thing. Equity is at its root fairness. Everybody has a fair shot at an opportunity. So when we started to develop this program, we built off of a foundation that Darnell had come up with already and then fleshed it out. And so what we realized was that, we've got these, within the energy efficiency workforce, there are a number of different career ladders. We've got the assessor ladder, who's the people who are evaluating homes, the installer ladder, people who are installing the measures into homes, and then none of them are going to be successful without good support. So you've got the office worker side. And so we realized that there are these career ladders where you start with some basic skills and work your way up. And what we did is we kind of turned that on its side. So students come in after their freshman year. We start with a summer program where they get these trainings that you see in year one. It includes, what I'm focusing on here, the technical skills, but I'll talk a little bit about how it's not just the technical skills. So the idea here is that each year they get some additional training, and then many of those trainings convey nationally recognized industry certifications. The idea is that at the end of the 3 years, if they stay with the program through the 3 years, they graduate from high school with 6 nationally recognized technical certifications that position them very well to be in high demand for a career, if that is the direction they choose to go. So, with this, they get infiltration, duct leakage, and air leakage control installers, kind of the basic fundamentals for the assessor and installer ladders. Then in the next year, get a little more into the fundamentals of building science and healthy homes. And then in the third year, start getting their building analyst and retrofit installer, where they're pretty much ready to go once they graduate. But it's not just the technical skills. If it was just the technical skills, we would, I think, still be doing good service, but we would not be positioning these young adults and these future thought leaders to take on a wider variety of challenges. So in addition to the technical skills, which represent about a third of the training, we also have leadership skills. So it's the pillars of learning, learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together, as well as urban sustainability and advocacy, so that they can be the best versions of themselves and be leaders in their communities, advocates for their communities, and know how to relate in a leadership role with others that they are going to need to work with, elected officials, corporations, et cetera. So we really try to make sure that they get this breadth of experience and breadth of knowledge to really make them be the future thought leaders from these communities going into the future. We also recognize that if it's only in the summer, it ends up being summer camp. So we are having additional activities, we call them bridging activities, through the school year, 1 or 2 times a week, or not, I'm sorry, 1 or 2 times a month, not per week, 1 or 2 times per month. It can take a variety of aspects for how exactly, what exactly the bridging activities are, but it's a way for them to keep in touch with the program, and so they'll be ready to go into the next year, and it becomes a kind of consistent part of their life instead of just something that shows up for a few weeks each summer. So we had our first summer this past year. It was a fantastic summer. I had very high expectations, and these students exceeded my expectations by a lot. They were just absolutely phenomenal. 10 students from the South Chicago suburbs. All 10 achieved BPI's infiltration duct leakage certification. They were the youngest ever to achieve this certification, and 9 of 10 got the air leakage control installer certification. Again, the youngest ever to achieve these certifications from the south suburbs of Chicago. And at the culmination event at the end of the summer, Cook County Board President President Preckwinkle was our keynote speaker. She named them the Youth Sustainability Council for the county. And then in the end of October of 2021, the county held a listening session with the students to understand what some of their concerns were relating to the environmental conditions and opportunities in their communities. So this will be the last slide I have before I'll turn it over to John for kind of talking about how we got this off the ground. One of the things we want to be clear on is there's not one path. We want to make sure that people recognize there are a number of different careers out there. This, if you go into this, it doesn't mean just because you're learning infiltration duct leakage or air leakage control installer that you are being tunneled into those fields. There's a lot of areas with the leadership skills, with the advocacy skills. There are governmental positions, state and federal agencies, community action agencies, utilities, the implementers, contractors, advocacy. There's a whole range of organizations that are in this space. And, some of these kids, they'll go to college, and we believe they'll be better prepared to succeed in college. And if they don't choose to do that, or even if they do, this, we believe, will lead to plenty of great opportunities for them going forward. And with that, I will turn it over to John. John does not have slides. He'll just talk through how we put this together.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you to everybody here as attendees today, and as well as NCAP for affording us the opportunity to talk with you today and really socialize this great program that we've all come together and developed. And we believe wholeheartedly this program is going to be a platform that is scalable to move forward to all different sectors. In particularly, we think this has a strong opportunity to grow within community action. And so that said, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how did we get the funding together, and who are some of the partners, and what did it take to really get this off the ground? The first thing it took was a lot of dedication of time and effort before we even knew it was going to be funded by the 3 executive partners, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Francisco and myself. And, I think that it's important to understand that as Darnell spoke to the theory of change, in order to make something truly sustainable and successful, you really have to understand how do you take something and then create social mobilization? And we did that through three things. We recognized the barriers and the lack of opportunities in BIPOC communities. We organized solutions, not only through ourselves, but with our partners. And then we socialized this opportunity with different stakeholders. And we were very fortunate and lucky that the local high school here in southern portion of Cook County, High School District 205, which incorporates three high schools. That is Thornton, Thornwood, and Thornridge High Schools. That's a culmination of where the 10 students came from. And so obviously the district was one of the largest partners. They were a strong partner in the recruiting process and how we attain the students. They provided us Dr. Shaniqua Jones, who was our emotional behavioral assistance professor. So, we didn't just look at this and say, how are we going to move this project forward and think of only the aspects that we had to deliver? We had to be all encompassing, just like Darnell spoke to. It takes the whole ego network to be transformative and not transactional. And so through that partnership, the school also provided all of the transportation. So from a funding perspective, we didn't have to worry about where were we going to get emotional and behavioral assistance, where were we going to get the transportation, because all of these students come from three different high schools, which means geographically, they're not all located in one area. So that was one way that it made the budget something that would be less burden and funding we didn't have to seek. And it also was a strong partnership. As you all are aware, U of I, UEG, and CETA are the design and implementing partners of this project. The majority of the funding did come from the Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG. Came in two forms of that funding. Some of it came from CETA's direct CSBG grant. As they redid the budget for the 2021 program year, our community needs assessment previously showed 2 years in a row that youth education was lacking in underserved BIPOC communities. So we felt that this was a great opportunity. And then we just completed our current CNA, and then that again reinforced the need for this type of programming to ensure that the future voices and leaders of communities have the opportunity to be developed and have strategies to make themselves successful and create foundational change. The other aspect of the CSBG funding was from our state office, who seen huge value in this opportunity and this program for these youth. So they actually use some of their state discretionary CSBG dollars to provide some of the funding that our program CSBG could not. And so being able to pull those two sources together was the way that we funded the foundation and the larger part of the program. CETA is an organization through the approval of our CEO, Mr. Harold Rice, was able to provide $11,000 in stipend funds through our unrestricted endeavors. So we thought that was important. And I say that to be intentional as other partners think about this opportunity, or community action agencies think about maybe traveling down this path for a program. What we found is that 34 people had actually gone through the formal steps of applying to be part of this program. And we ended up accepting 15, even on the day of the kickoff event for noticing those that were accepted with a certificate of acceptance and a ceremony. While we were actually on this Zoom call, we were getting in the chat from several of the students that they had to drop out of the program because they had to find a job and help their parents pay the bills. We recognized immediately that we couldn't allow this to happen. And I spoke with our other executive partners, Darnell and Paul, and asked them, to help me have a conversation with our CEO to then ensure that we could secure the fundings for a stipend. So each student that remained in the program, which ended up being 11 overall, and then unfortunately due to personal reasons, one had to drop out of the program, but the 10 that completed the program each got $1,000 stipend for sticking it out and maintaining their presence in the program. And I want to be very clear, one of the things that we held our hat on is that none of the students knew. They didn't know they were getting a stipend until about 3 weeks into the program. So we knew that we had students that wanted to create change in their life, but also create the change in the future of their communities. And so we're very excited about that. Some of the other partnerships that we had to solidify to make this happen, we had to use a curriculum design and integration consultant by the name of Naomi Burkhoff, who actually donated her time. She did not charge anything to our budget for this. And I keep kind of standing out who's not charging us for their services so that people understand what it takes to pull the resources together to really build this program. And so BPI, the Buildings Performance Institute, was also a partner. They obviously provide the nationally recognized certifications that relate directly to the home performance and energy retrofit industry and energy industry. And they worked with Darnell and Paul, who were implementing the classes that provided certifications. And then we had some just overall socialization support from Department of Energy and from IREC, which is the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. We actually were able to use a new tool that they developed. They have a career path mapping tool that really shows the verticals that can be laid out within this industry. So the current slide that's up, right, these are different sectors in which you can attain employment through going through this program. But what's really interesting is that the verticals that exist within those sectors, from being an energy auditor to a quality control inspector to a program manager to a program support specialist to an architect to a builder to a construction owner. So this is not just an industry that you can only be an energy auditor or only be a quality control inspector. There are absolute aligned verticals with the leadership, advocacy, technical, and sustainability training that we do over the 3.5 to 4 years of this program that allow these students to reach maximum success. So with that said, I'm going to pause. And I know that we have a Q&A section. If I've missed anything, please, Darnell or Paul, unmute yourselves and step in. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. I know that there was one question in the chat where someone is asking, where can we find these graduates? Our network desperately needs them. By Shanita asked that question in the chat. And I think that, Paul or John, either one of you want to respond to that?
Well, I can say that, this first group, they are in their sophomore year of high school right now. So they're not quite available for large scale work yet. One thing we are going to be wanting to do, we anticipated that when they were in their post freshman year, they would nominally be 15 years old, too young to work. We would like to, when they're after their sophomore year and they are nominally 16 and now old enough to have at least some kind of summer job, we would like to be placing them with internships for when they are not, when they're not in the summer program. So that would be a way to kind of start getting them in, so build relationships with them. And in a couple years, we will be having them actually graduate. And the goal is that we continue to have a pipeline and also be growing it geographically. So not quite there yet, but we can talk about internship opportunities. We can talk about how to be keeping these young folks in mind as they get closer to their own graduation.
And I do see a question that came in the Q&A tab. Is the $1,000 stipend a one-time offer, or do you provide $1,000 per year?
That's a great question. And the goal is to provide that stipend year over year. And hopefully, at least with High School District 205, they actually have a summer work program, which we were not aware of initially because of the pace at which this program grabbed their interest and how quickly they wanted us to implement. So our goal would be for CETA to hopefully again provide that $1,000 or from some other philanthropic source, but also sign them up for the district summer program, which would pay them up to $10 an hour to participate in the program.
I think it's notable also, Amy, to mention that one of the things that's really important is that, and we mentioned this on one of our previous slides, is equity, right? We want to be fair. And I think that whenever we have students that we're bringing in and we're training them and we're developing them, I think that it's fair and it's equitable that we're able to offer them, you know, something for their time, because it sends the wrong message when we don't, especially when you're dealing with students that are coming from, you know, disproportionately underserved communities. And so it becomes really important that we set the right tone from the very beginning, that we are able to show them that when you have a value, that value should be compensated. That's another one of just kind of like the organic learning lessons that's embedded in this whole experience. Green Generation, you know, we didn't talk much about it today, but one of the things that we want to be very intentional about as well when we start talking about vertical mediums is that, you know, while some students may come in and be very, very interested in the, you know, the home energy performance space, it's also, you know, good for them to understand that there are other areas that they will be exposed to that may spark an interest. Maybe it's in, you know, being a civil engineer or an environmental engineer, or maybe it's go on to be a sustainability practitioner. That's the beauty of this particular initiative being a system, because these students don't have just one path that they can take, but all the paths are interoperable, they're interconnected, and they show how one aspect of building a sustainable community really does depend on other things happening in order to achieve that goal. You can go in and make all of the homes energy efficient, but if we're not addressing outdoor quality, air quality issues, if we're not addressing, you know, social determinants of health, if we're not addressing all of these other things that also impacts the human life, then we are not addressing the entire community. That's why we look at this as a system versus silos. And so when we put together the system of sustainability, all of the things that John and Paul have both explained is very intricately interwoven into that system. But what we've done, this is what we've done societally, is we've chosen to pick certain things that we want to emphasize, and we kind of like pull them out in a silo, and then we want there to be this holistic impact. But if you're not solving problems from a systemic approach, then you're not going to have systemic outcomes. So Green Generation is designed to start to changing the students' perception of what it means to live in a healthy, sustainable community. Yes, it is a part of that is home energy performance and BPI certifications and all of those things, but it's also understanding that we need to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables in some of our food deserts. It's also making sure that we're addressing crime. It's also making sure that these communities have access to basic, you know, internet capabilities to keep them connected so that they can go to school if it happens to be an online platform that they have to learn from, you know, or whatever other, you know, tools and resources that they need. We have students that, you know, would have to sit and drive through parking lots when at the height of the pandemic just to gain access to internet. Like that's not sustainable, right? So all of these things that we're teaching them about advocacy and sustainability and home energy performance, it all truly does support a system.
I think that's a phenomenal point, Darnell. And I think one thing I'd like to add so that people understand is that this platform that we use to implement the program, right? It's designed to be dynamic. When we talk about there's a technical aspect of sustainability, meaning renewables, EV charging. This platform is designed to, you know, we know within a 4-year program, technology is going to change, and we have the ability as the G2 brand to be able to pivot, to understand and make changes, always maintaining the integrity and equity of the leadership and advocacy component, but recognizing that technology can drive changes in how we are sustainable, and we will always be prepared to make that pivot if necessary.
Thank you, John. Can I interject with another question from the question and answer tab?
Sure.
Somebody, Meg Power, asked, can you repeat what the schools contributed to the effort or will contribute in the future?
Yes, so in the program that just passed, the schools provided the bus transportation for the students. So the students there were collective areas for the students, which depending on what neighborhoods they lived in. So they picked them up and brought them in. And they also provided the emotional and behavioral support. So we did have a couple of circumstances where, some of the kids had some emotional challenges, or even one of the students had a learning disability. So we were able to bring in that resource, work with that student and their family. So once again, right, it's a whole family approach, brought the family in and made sure that we had the wraparound services required to ensure that that student could stay engaged without having to drop out of the program because of outside stressors or factors that might otherwise not be addressed.
I want to also add, in terms of what the schools provided, they did the recruitment of the students in the first place. They crafted the little flyers and postcards, and they were the ones who went out to the families. And we had some discussions early on. Who are we looking for? And we agreed that a lot of programs are saying, give us your top 10% who are well positioned to succeed. And we said, we're not looking to give more opportunities to people who have lots of opportunities. We're trying to help to develop opportunities, develop people for opportunities who may have fewer opportunities and could slip through the cracks. And so we worked with the school district. They identified who they thought would be good candidates for that. And I think, I'm not going to pretend that it was nailed perfectly first time out, but I think we had a nice cross section of people in the program. And so, we really relied on them to identify who would be good candidates and refer them to the program.
And I think that the other value, Amy, that we want to demonstrate through this program is how the program's impact transcended beyond the initial boundaries that we even anticipated. When we had the Cook County Board President, Tony Preckwinkle, as our keynote speaker at the students' graduation, and one of the students asked questions about how they could be more involved in influencing and impacting what's going on at the county level without hesitation. And anyone that knows President Preckwinkle, she does not do things in a vacuum or a knee-jerk type of response. Without hesitation, she said, I want you all to be the Sustainability Council for Cook County, and could ensure that those students got connected with the right, that our leadership and the students got connected with the right folks at the county to be able to have a listening session with these students. The students drove the conversation. They expressed the things that were important to them. And, and this is going to be an ongoing dialogue. And that, in my opinion, is one of the critical steps in affecting change. If you want to affect change, you have to affect change from a systemic place, starting with organizations, whether it's county, local government, county government, state government, federal government, but the entities that ultimately influence our day-to-day existence have to hear from these diverse thought leaders, regardless of how young they may be. And one of the things that we taught the students, and we'll continue to teach the students, is understanding that they have demonstrated knowledge. Like, one of the deterrents may be initially, oh, what do these teenagers know about, issues around the community and sustainability? When they have demonstrated knowledge, meaning that they're well-researched, they understand the issues, and they can articulate those issues, the age factor kind of goes out of the window, because they're speaking to issues that we as adults also know exist. And they have a much better lens on these things than what we would think, because the reality of it is those that are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So when we begin to integrate these students in a way that allow them to have their voices heard, acknowledging procedural justice, making sure we're looking at social justice, and ensuring that they're a part of the process, and that their voices are not only heard, but their voices are included and appreciated and valued to the degree that they begin to affect the way that policies and legislations and funding is actually allocated. then you begin to see the overall impact of what green generation is really designed to do.
Well said, Darnell. Did you also say that you have pilots in other places besides Chicago?
Paul, you want to take that?
Yeah, so not yet. Well, sort of not yet. We have received funding support from Ameren to launch a cohort in the Champaign area. So we started in Chicago where John and Darnell are, and John had great relationships with District 205 to get started. I talked briefly with some folks at Ameren about the program. They seem to really like it, obviously, because they've given us some funding support to start one up in Champaign. So this summer will be our first foray into expanding into multiple locations.
That's exciting. I think we would all like to hear more about that as that develops.
Us too.
Right. Do you have any, in conclusion, do you have any recommendations for any of our attendees who might want to launch a similar initiative in their area using their CSBG dollars?
I would say, before I turn to John, in closing, I would say that, number one, we are always available to be able to listen in and to be able to provide our expertise of what we've experienced in this. We are also able, sometimes it's the heavy lifting, right, that deters these types of programs, because it's a considerable amount of time. And so for our team, we're definitely willing to partner with folks to come in, and that they may not need, everything, but there may be, a design, a need to help with the design of it, and they actually launch it themselves. We don't have epistemic capacity, so we couldn't be, everything end to end, but definitely would be able to provide, some consulting support and, lean in and provide that type of support to another organization that may be interested by utilizing the model that we've already developed. That would be my initial response. John, you got something on that?
I think that, Darnell, you almost took the words out of my mouth from that capacity of understanding, right, design, implementation, and, getting it off the ground. As far as, from a funding perspective for organizations, community action agencies that receive CSBG funding, I would say, you want to start with your state office. Kind of there are some broad guidelines and that have to be followed when we talk about what CSBG funding can be utilized for. But then there's also some nuances, at least that I've learned from going to different conferences and talking to other CSBG professionals and state representatives of CSBG state offices. So I think that, it's important to be structured and prepared. Lay out your work plans, make sure you have your learning objectives and what the deliverables are going to be. Utilize a Roma logic model for outputs and outcomes and strategy. These are things that show that you're not only passionate about trying to make change within your community with this funding, but also that you are obviously well-versed in understanding, the funding and what it stands for and how they like to see things presented. The other thing that I would say is that, really look for that alternative leveraged or shared cost. It's definitely something that our office is Illinois CSBG office is pressed upon us, and not only just to CETA as the community action agency, but Darnell and Paul as our collective partners as well. So, and that's the other thing that, just because CETA has a CSBG program and receives the funding, when we talked about this program, we didn't do it, as Darnell mentioned, in silos, because you can't succeed in silos. You need to be transparent about who the partners are and how you're going to move the initiative forward. I think garnering that support is really, really important, because you don't want to come up with an idea and then all of a sudden you have all these procurement issues about how you're going to utilize the dollars and justify the cost. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, John. We have one last question in the Q&A tab if we have time. Hurley Coleman asked, do you have a framework model available, like a PDF for agencies to review? I know that we can make the slides available, but do you have anything like that?
Yeah, we have a framework, and Paul and John and I could talk about this. It's an experience, and it kind of gives you a layout of what of how you move forward through the process. And so we could talk about that internally and have a PDF made available for folks that may want to see that.
That would be fabulous. I know on behalf of the partnership, we would love to get that and circulate it to our attendees when we send out, materials after the event. Is that something you would be able to get to us next week or next
So we
month,
could- we
or
could
what's
work
the
on
timetable?
the PDF out like next week.
Oh, thank you. Much appreciated. And thank you to Hurley for asking that question. We're right up at the end of the time. So I will thank our speakers for joining us today. Thank you for all the work that you've done launching this wonderful initiative. I know that you got a letter of appreciation from DOE and that you've gotten recognition in the media and other national platforms. So I think on behalf of all of Community Action, we wish you continued success with this endeavor, and we look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate the opportunity, Amy.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.